Specifically, the regulations permanently bar from our ports criminals convicted of espionage, sedition, treason, terrorism, crimes involving transportation security, improper transport of hazardous material, unlawful use of explosive device, bomb threats, murder, violation of the RICO Act where one of the above crimes is a predicate act, and conspiracy to commit any of these crimes. The Department of Homeland Security regulations also bar recent felons, defined as those convicted within the last 7 years or incarcerated in the last 5 years, from gaining access to our ports if they have been convicted of any of the following felonies: assault with intent to murder, kidnapping or hostage taking, rape or aggravated sexual abuse, unlawful use of a firearm, extortion, fraud, bribery, smuggling, immigration violations, racketeering, robbery, drug dealing, arson, or conspiracy to commit any of these crimes. Madam President, these regulations were developed after an extensive process that included consultation with the Departments of Justice and Transportation to identify individuals who have a propensity to engage in unlawful activity, specifically activity that places our ports at risk. These regulations governing who can gain access to our seaports are nearly identical to the regulations that govern those who can gain access to our airports, as well as those who can transport hazardous material in our country. These prohibitions are crucial because individuals who engage in this type of unlawful activity have a greater likelihood to engage in these acts or in acts that put American ports and American lives at risk. Our law enforcement officials understand this risk. They understand the threat our ports face when traditional criminals, particularly organized criminals, work with terrorists. For example, the FBI recently apprehended a member of the Russian mafia attempting to sell missiles to an FBI agent that he believed was acting as a middleman for terrorists. Joseph Billy Jr., the FBI's top counterterrorism official, recently commented that the FBI is continuing to look at a nexus between organized crime and terrorists, and they are looking at this very aggressively. The threat not only comes from criminals working directly with terrorists, it also comes from criminals who may look the other way when a suspect container comes from the port. Joseph King, a former Customs Service agent and now a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, outlined the concern very clearly. It is an invitation to smuggling of all kinds, he said. Instead of bringing in 50 kilograms of heroin, what would stop them from bringing in 5 kilograms of plutonium? The nightmare scenario here is where a criminal at one of our ports who may think he is just helping a friend smuggle in drugs inadvertently helps smuggle in a weapon of mass destruction. That, Madam President, is a risk we cannot take. I offered this amendment last year to address this threat and to ensure that serious felons are kept out of our ports. My amendment codified in statute the then proposed TWIC regulations. As I said earlier, my amendment was unanimously adopted and was included in the Senate-passed version of the Safe Ports Act that passed 98-0. Unfortunately, Madam President, my amendment was also completely gutted behind closed doors in the conference committee. The provision went from addressing a list of 20 serious felons to a list of just 4. These 4 felonies are so rare that the conference committee made the provision almost meaningless. I am extremely disappointed by the stealth opposition to this message or to this measure. I cannot understand who would oppose banning serious felons from gaining secure access at our American ports. While no senator has been willing to publicly oppose this measure, the Longshoremen's Labor Union was more than happy to take credit for gutting the provision. Late last year, the International and Warehouse Union claimed credit for killing the provision in the Safe Port Conference Committee. They stated in their newsletter that we have heard rumors that Senator DeMint is particularly angry with the union's successful lobbying effort to strip his anti-labor provision. He may attempt to amend another piece of legislation so the union will stay on guard to protect its members' interests. Madam President, apparently this union has stayed on guard because it was able to get 5 senators to object to this vital Homeland Security measure when I tried to pass it a second time late last year. I wish I could say the unions would stop at fighting this legislation on the Senate floor, but they are also gearing up to mount a legal battle against the Department of Homeland Security regulations. In response to a Wall Street Journal editorial on the subject, the union stated that the TWIC security regulations were double jeopardy and unconstitutional. This is a clear indication that they have a legal challenge in mind. It seems clear that once longshoremen start applying for TWIC cards, and some members are rejected because they're convicted felons, the labor unions are going to take the Department of Homeland Security to court and try to bog the regulations down in lengthy battles. The consequence will be that as we continue to fight this global war on terror, America's ports will be staffed by serious felons who cannot be trusted. Now, some of my colleagues may be tempted to come to the defense of the longshoremen. They will say that the individuals in question have paid their debt to society, and barring them will gut our port workforce. They may also claim that the crimes listed in the Department of Homeland Security regulations are somehow not related to Homeland Security. These objections are just plain wrong. I don't disagree that convicted felons should be given a second chance. I hope they get back on their feet and become productive members of their communities. What I disagree with is that we should give serious felons a pass, literally and figuratively, to access the most secure areas of America's port infrastructure. When they're fresh out of prison, we should not trust them with the most vulnerable areas of our ports. The stakes here are simply too high. As for the concern that barring these individuals will empty the ranks of the port workforce, the facts don't agree. When the Department of Homeland Security issued nearly 350,000 ID cards for hazmat truck drivers and subjected them to the same background check that is required by my amendment, only 3,100 were rejected. That's less than 1%. The fact is, we're talking about an isolated group of serious felons here, and the workforce in the United States is dynamic enough to supply the few thousand longshoremen that may be needed to replace those we let go. Now, finally, Madam President, some may say that these felonies do not represent serious crimes. To that, I would ask any of my colleagues to tell me which individual he or she wants working at our ports where security is so important. Murderers, extortionists, drug dealers, bomb makers. I just want to hear the rationale for trusting these criminals with our national security. The bottom line is this: my amendment applies nearly the same protections to seaports that are already applied at our airports. It will make us safer by keeping individuals who have shown a willingness to break the law outside our ports. This is extremely important. We can spend all the money in our treasury trying to screen cargo, but if we don't screen the people who work at our ports, we cannot expect to be safe. I do want to thank several people for supporting this important policy. First, I want to thank the Senator from Maine, Senator Collins, who was very helpful to me during the debate on the Self Ports Act last year. I also want to thank the Senator from Connecticut, Senator Lieberman, for his support. I should also say that the Senator from Hawaii, Senator Inouye, was also helpful in getting this provision into the bill. This is a bipartisan proposal, and it should not be controversial. Americans expect us to check and verify the nature of the people who work at our seaports, and we have a responsibility to ensure that that happens.